everybody. Now we finally have a video with the very first story that I already had. I'm hoping that I make no mistakes, but I hope you do enjoy the story itself. It's quite interesting. I've read it once, so if I do make any mistakes, I do apologize in advance. But I say we jump straight to it. They write, I was 19 that summer, staying with my grandparents in the Somerset countryside, proper countryside, the sort where the forest presses right up to the back fence and the lane outside carries the busy hum of young families hurtling between school runs, shops and Sunday lunches. It always felt safe there, almost too safe, as though the whole area had convinced itself nothing strange could possibly happen to people who waved at their neighbours and kept tidy gardens. My grandparents' cottage sat a little apart from the others, detached, and older than most houses along the road, its bricks weathered by rain and something far older than weather. I loved the place, though I never quite shook the feeling that the forest behind it watched the walls breathe. It wasn't settling. Never liked that forest. This particular Sunday morning began as many did, with a muffled slam of the front door as Gran and Grandad left for church. They never missed a service, even if their arguing joints begged for mercy. I lay in bed, half cocooned in warmth, relieved not to be dragged along. The topic of church attendance had grown prickly between me and Gran. She believed she'd failed me, and I believed she ought to let me live as I saw fit. Yet as ever, affection underpinned the conflict. She loved stubbornly, and I, regrettably, inherited that trait. I rolled onto my other side, letting my body loosen, ready to slip back into that soft, drifting trance between sleep and waking, when the stairs creaked. Not the loud, complaining groan of the first step, nor the two at the top that always sounded as though they resented their own existence. No, this was a single, perfectly weighted creak somewhere in the middle of the staircase, a stair that had never made a sound on its own before. My eyes snapped open, though I did not move right away. I simply listened, heart tapping quietly against my ribs, as though trying not to draw attention to itself. These old houses, I told myself, made their own noises. Wood settles, timbers shift, the forest presses moisture into the walls, all quite normal. But even in the rational haze, something felt wrong. The silence that followed was too complete, as if the house, aware that it had spoken out of turn, now held its breath, and I found myself holding mine with it. I lifted my head slowly, cautiously, until my neck trembled from the tension, ears straining from the faintest movement below. Nothing followed. No soft tread, no second creak, no shifting shadow creeping up the stairs. Eventually I let my head fall back to the pillow, rubbing at my tired eyes, trying to dismiss the unease curling up my spine. But the thing about small, seemingly insignificant sounds is this. The mind knows when one does not belong, and mine refused to forget it. So they write. I was used to a kind of perfect silence in Gran's house, a settled, almost deliberate hush, as though every beam and brick had agreed long ago to mind their manners while people slept. This creak, this was new, and the longer I lay there thinking about it, the more awake I became. Far too awake to drift off again. So I decided it would be best to get out of bed and make myself some breakfast. Anything to anchor me back into the familiar rhythm of Sunday morning. Batting out of my bedroom, I paused at the landing and leaned over the banister, peering down toward the front door. If by some odd chance my grandparents had returned for something they forgot, their coats would be hanging on the hooks by the door. It was a silly comfort, but I looked anyway. Only the usual ragged bits and bobs hung there. An old scarf, Granddad's gardening hat, a tote bag Nan insisted was perfectly good. No coats. Nothing that suggested anyone else was home. Which meant, of course, that I was entirely alone. I stood there for a moment longer, listening to the house breathe around me. It must have been the cottage settling after the cool of the night, I told myself. Timber expanding, pipes waking, all perfectly natural in an old place like this. And yet somewhere in the back of my mind, a whisper of doubt curled its fingers around the thought. If the house was merely warming itself awake, why did it sound like a footstep? I went off to the kitchen, filled the kettle, trying to steady myself with a simple routine of making tea. There is something reassuring about it. The weight of the kettle, the clink of that switch, the hum that follows. For the moment I set it down and flicked the switch, another sound cut through the stillness. A single step, as though someone were standing there, shifting their weight ever so slightly. A chill rolled down my spine. Slow and deliberate, like cold fingers tracing each vertebra. The earlier unease which I'd convinced myself was nothing now took on a sharper edge. This no longer felt like a house stretching its old bones. This felt aware. I turned toward the window above the sink, searching for something normal to ground me. Granddad's car was gone, of course it was, and so were most of the neighbors'. The whole lane looked emptied out, washed in that pale Sunday stillness. I stuck my head cautiously out into the corridor, angling myself towards the base of the staircase. If someone truly were on the stairs, I would have heard them move again. But there was nothing. No shifting weight, no retreating footsteps, no breath, only the thick, expectant silence that settles in places where something has just happened. An intruder made no sense. We'd had a stabbing on the road a couple of years back, an awful business that shook the community, but never burglaries or muggings. People here locked their doors more out of habit than fear. And yet standing there in the corridor, kettle humming behind me, I couldn't shake one very real, very unnerving truth. Someone, or something, had taken a step on those stairs. The thought struck me sharply. I had to check. Standing there in my boxers and tank top, I felt foolishly exposed, but I took a few steps into the corridor anyway. And before I could gather my courage properly, something fell directly above me. That's my bedroom above me. So they're right. A thud light, but definite, as though something had tipped over or been knocked from its place. For a second, I stood frozen, patting myself down instinctively and realizing my phone was upstairs. A small, useless part of me thought I could creep up quietly, but fear makes people bold in strange ways. I wanted whoever was up there to know I was coming, that I was not to be toyed with. So I shouted something, I'm not even certain exactly what, intended to sound steady, mature, commanding. Came out shaky, embarrassingly thin. No reply followed, only the stillness of the old house breathing around me. I forced myself up the stairs, 2 at a time, glancing into each room as I went. The landing felt colder than moments before. By the time I reached the doorway to my own bedroom, my pulse was hammering so loudly, drowned out everything else. There on the carpet lay my phone, screen face down, exactly where it shouldn't have been. I had left it securely on the bedside cupboard. I knew that with absolute certainty. I always placed it there before sleeping. There was no chance it could have vibrated itself off. I hadn't received a message in days. Certainly none in the summer when no one here bothered with me. I certainly hadn't knocked it down by accident. None of it made sense. I checked the room thoroughly. Every corner, every shadow, under the bed, behind the door, twice over just to calm the rising panic. Then I checked the other rooms again for good measure. There was no one. but the puzzle of it sat heavy in my chest. In all the times I had stayed alone in this house, nothing like this had ever happened. Nothing that felt so pointed, so deliberately unsettling. And I knew I could never tell Gran. She would either dismiss it entirely or take it as a divine proof that I ought to be in pew every Sunday without fail. Either way, she wouldn't have heard me. Not truly. So I swallowed it. But the unease stayed with me, sharp as the morning light through the curtains, and I knew this would be the day I would never quite forget. So they write, a couple of years after. Quite the story, I say. I liked it. It has quite the punch, and I did feel a couple of shivers going up my spine as I read that, so it certainly does weigh quite a bit, and it hits home, because something like this did happen to me too, and only once. But that is for another time probably. Not sure whether I would put my own stories on my channel, but maybe the time will be right for it when we do have a following. Anyway, that is it for me. Thank you very much for listening to this first story on the channel, and probably I'll see you all soon once more. Have a good time zone.